main story. Deeper in debt, a growing number of people in Britain are struggling with money. Exclusive research by Breakfast suggests that more than a quarter of us are anxious about how to pay the bills.
And in addition to that, the country's biggest debt charity says it's seen a huge rise in requests for help. The number of people getting in touch with the Consumer Credit Counselling Service rose by 65% last year. Well, our business reporter, Richard Westcott, is here with us this morning. Good morning to you, Richard.
Morning, yeah.
Worrying, very worrying indeed.
It is. Let's have a look at these breakfast figures, the figures specifically for this programme, and I suppose there are two big headlines. The first one is 1 in 4 of us is worried about paying off the bills. Now, interestingly, the people in the South East are the most worried and the Scots are the most laid back, apparently. The second headline, which is more surprising, more than half of us still associate debt with shame or being embarrassed. But the surprising bit of that is it's young people who think it's shameful, embarrassing, rather than older people, even though debt is, so much more common now than it ever was before. Anyway, let's have a look. Paul Custance is £24,000 in the red. That's £1,000 for every year of his life.
I do feel some shame towards the debt that I do have, and I think a lot of people probably in my position do as well. But I think that shame more is buried in the fact that I've been ignoring it for so long.
The debt's costing him £400 every month. That means after food, travel and bills, he's got nothing left. This exclusive poll for BBC Breakfast shows Paul's hardly alone. Most people, including young people, think his generation will struggle to control their spending. More surprisingly, the figures also show that they're more ashamed and embarrassed than their parents or their grandparents about owing money. And it's often the luxuries getting them into trouble. On average, fewer than a third of us struggle after splashing out on a holiday or some nice clothes. That number goes way up for the under 35s.
Nowadays, they would put that debt or the money to get on a credit card or whatever and do it now. There's too much of, I want it now.
Debt charities have seen a massive increase in people getting in touch because they're sinking under the strain.
Increasingly, we're seeing people over 60 on our roll of people needing help. And that may be because it's the Barclaycard generation growing up.
The poll suggests millions of us are worried just about paying the bills every month. If you are one of those people who's worried, we put some links on the Breakfast website to take you through to some of these charities. You can ring up and get some independent and private help.
Thank you very much indeed.
Richard, yes, thanks very much. We'll be speaking a lot more about this on the programme this morning. Now, more armed police are being sent out on the streets of South London in response to a string of murders in the past fortnight. The move, announced by the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Ian Blair, follows the killing of 15-year-old Billy Cox at his home in Clapham North on Wednesday. He was the third teenager to be shot dead in South London in the past 2 weeks. Well, Breakfast's Ben Ando is at Scotland Yard for us this morning. Ben, good morning. What's the very latest on the investigation?
Well, yes, good morning to you. The latest is overnight that police have been continuing their inquiries into the death of Billy Cox, who was shot dead on St Valentine's Day at his home in Clapham. His body was discovered, or he was discovered dying by his 12-year-old sister, who called the emergency services, but they could do nothing. Now, the police say that one thing they have done immediately is to establish a task force to investigate these 3 deaths. There was one in Streatham at the start of February at an ice rink. There was another one 3 days later in Peckham, and now this third death, and all those are being investigated together, although at the moment the police say it's too early to link them. But what is quite clear is that together they have created a climate of fear in South London and a feeling that gun crime, especially amongst these young people, these very young teenagers, is out of control.
And Ben, this is really grabbing the headlines, isn't it? What's being done today? There's some high-profile meetings going on.
Well, yes, that's right. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Ian Blair, is meeting the Home Secretary, John Reid, and other senior police officers to talk about what to do about this thing. And one suggestion that has been made is that at the moment, the mandatory age for a minimum of, the minimum age for a mandatory 5-year jail sentence for being in possession of a firearm is 21 years. There is talk of bringing that down to 17 years to discourage young people from carrying guns. Now, apart from that meeting, the senior police officers will also be meeting community leaders and members or representatives from the London Mayor's office.
OK, Ben Ando at Scotland Yard for us. Thank you.
Now, in the wake of those murders in South London, the Conservative leader David Cameron will today say that everyone has responsibility for improving the morals of our young people. In a speech in Oxford, Mr Cameron will stress that youngsters must be encouraged to have more respect for authority. He'll also pledge that a Conservative government would put family life ahead of economic prosperity for Britain.
Politicians from around the world have made what's being seen as a significant step towards breaking the deadlock on climate change. The ministers who have been meeting in Washington have agreed for the first time that major developing countries such as India and China, as well as rich nations, should limit their carbon emissions.
The task is to get this scientific knowledge before enough people around the world so that they demand that the leaders in all spheres begin to solve the crisis.
Plans to build 2 new prisons will be announced this morning, due to be built on the sites of current jails in Merseyside and South East London. They'll provide more than 1,000 extra places for inmates. They are part of plans to provide 8,000 extra cells over the next 5 years.
A premature baby born at just 24 weeks has made a miraculous recovery after being given the anti-impotence drug Viagra. The baby is one of the first to have the experimental treatment, but doctors hope it could now be used in more cases.
Hello. Tiny Lewis Goodfellow may not be the target patient for the anti-impotence drug Viagra, but it seems the little blue pill may have saved his life. Born premature at just 24 weeks last August, he weighed just 1 pound 8 ounces. His chance of survival was slim and made even worse by a heart defect and a collapsed lung. His parents had all but given up hope when, as a last resort, doctors at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle administered the drug which opened up his tiny blood vessels, allowing oxygen to move around his body.
The Viagra was suggested when the doctors had run out of everything else. You know, Lewis couldn't be given any more oxygen. There was nothing else they could do. They were just clutching at straws, basically, which is when they asked us if we could try this. They explained that it was experimental and that it may not have any effect at all. But basically, it was a last resort.
Yeah, sleepies. Doctors have only just started using the drug on babies to help circulation. While Lewis still needs constant oxygen, he's making good progress. His parents say a miracle drug has saved their miracle baby. Keith Doyle, BBC News.
NASA launches a unique space mission later today to study the phenomenon of the Northern Lights. 5 identical space probes will be sent into orbit for 5 years. Finding out what triggers those intense shimmering lights will help scientists better predict the weather in space. Well, our science correspondent, Christine McGurty, has sent this report from the project's headquarters in California.
The dancing lights of the aurora are a magical sight, but these shimmering curtains hide a scientific mystery. What triggers the most intense and colourful displays? A unique space mission is set to find out. Not 1 spacecraft, but 5. In orbit together, they'll work in tandem to pin down the precise origins of the most intense aurora.
The first spacecraft will identify the start of the substorm, where the disturbance first occurs in the Earth's magnetic field, and the other spacecraft will be used to determine how fast and how quickly that disturbance spreads towards other locations.
This is Mission Control, and the 5 spacecraft will be monitored round the clock from here. In fact, the scientists only actually need 4 spacecraft. The 5th one's being taken along as a spare in case one of them breaks down. Auroras start with a violent explosion on the sun, sending particles hurtling into the Earth's magnetic field. They collide with air molecules, creating those distinctive glowing lights. But they can also cause serious disruption on the ground and in space. And the mission should provide new insights into a phenomenon that's baffled scientists for decades. Christine McGurty, BBC News in California.
And now for a look at this morning's weather.